It all started as a quiet weekend at the family cabin, the kind of place meant for peace, laughter, and escape from the chaos of the city. The cabin had always been a safe haven, tucked away in the woods, where neighbors rarely passed by, and the only sounds at night were the crickets and the wind through the trees. But that weekend was different. An unexpected knock at the door changed everything, turning a calm evening into a night no one could have prepared for. My sister had been staying there with her husband, enjoying the break they had been craving. She thought nothing of it when she saw a man in uniform standing outside, flashing what looked like a badge. He claimed to be a police officer responding to a disturbance. At first glance, it seemed routine. But something about his tone, his questions, and the way he carried himself didn't feel right. What she didn't realize was that this wasn't a real cop at all. This was someone sent by the HOA, a man hired to intimidate, to scare, and to push them into giving up their land. The dispute over the property had been boiling for months, but no one could have imagined it would reach this level. What made this encounter even more dangerous was the fact that my sister had no idea the man's true intentions or how far he was willing to go. But what the HOA never accounted for was her husband. Calm, quiet, and always in the background, he wasn't just any man. He was dealt a force, trained for moments exactly like this. The door wasn't even fully shut before everything began to spiral. And that's when the real story began to unfold. The cabin had been in our family for years, passed down from our grandparents, and it was more than just a piece of land. It was where memories lived. Summer barbecues, fishing trips, and late-night campfires made it the heart of our family's story. But the HOA never saw it that way. To them, it was about control, power, and pushing boundaries. They claimed the property was under their jurisdiction, even though it sat outside their official lines. My sister and her husband refused to give in, and that defiance had put a target on their backs. Tension had been building for months. First came the letters, formal notices demanding dues they didn't owe. Then came the threats, neighbors whispering about consequences if they didn't comply. My sister thought it would blow over, that the HOA was just bluffing. But her husband, with his quiet and watchful nature, knew better. He'd seen patterns like this before, just in very different places. When the so-called cop appeared that night, it wasn't just about enforcing rules. His presence felt staged, his words rehearsed, like someone had fed him a script. The flashlight in his hand shook slightly, his stance unsteady, not the posture of a trained officer. My sister's instincts told her something was off, but she couldn't place what. Meanwhile, her husband stood a few feet behind, calm as ever, eyes locked on the stranger, reading every move. What the HOA didn't realize was that every moment was being quietly calculated. My sister's husband wasn't going to let anyone harm his family, not on his watch. But instead of confronting the man immediately, he waited. He knew patience was a weapon. And as the fake officer lingered at the door, the woods around the cabin seemed to grow darker, heavier, as if holding its breath for what would come next. The man at the door kept pressing, asking odd questions that had nothing to do with the supposed disturbance. He wanted to know how long they planned to stay, whether anyone else was inside, and even hinted that the cabin might not be safe under current conditions. My sister's unease grew with every word, but she stayed polite, careful not to reveal her fear. The last thing she wanted was to escalate things with someone pretending to be an authority figure. Inside, her husband's mind was racing. Years of training had taught him to study the smallest details: tone, movement, eye contact. This man wasn't law enforcement. His badge was cheap, the stitching on his uniform wrong, and the way he rested his hand near his hip screamed intimidation, not protection. It wasn't just about a boundary dispute anymore. This was orchestrated. Someone from the HOA had gone too far, and now their quiet retreat had turned into a trap. But there was more at play than just the fake cop. Earlier that week, neighbors had been unusually distant. The couple who usually waved from their porch didn't make eye contact. Another resident hinted that things were about to get serious. At the time, my sister brushed it off, but now those warnings rang louder. The HOA wasn't working alone. They had people watching, pressuring, isolating her and her husband from the rest of the community. Even worse, There was the matter of the land itself. Rumors swirled about plans to develop the surrounding forest into high-end housing. The cabin, sitting on prime lakefront property, was standing in their way. This wasn't just a disagreement over dues. It was about money, power, and control. And as the man at the door refused to leave, it became clear that the HOA was willing to cross lines most people would never imagine. The air inside the cabin grew heavier with each second the fake officer lingered. My sister could feel her pulse quicken, every instinct telling her that this man wasn't just there to talk. His eyes kept darting past her shoulder, scanning the room like he was measuring the space or checking for witnesses. It wasn't the behavior of someone trying to help, it was the behavior of someone stalling, waiting for the right moment. Her husband didn't move. He stood silently near the fireplace, body relaxed but alert, watching every flicker of expression. He'd seen this look before, the look of a man who thought he had control. And yet, the longer the silence stretched, the more the balance began to shift. The fake officer's voice grew sharper, more impatient. He insisted that she step outside to clear things up. That was the breaking point. She knew no real cop would ever demand something like that. At that moment, headlights flickered through the trees. Another vehicle had pulled up the narrow dirt road, crunching gravel beneath its tires. My sister's breath caught in her throat. Was it backup? Neighbors? Or another layer of this staged intimidation? The fake cop straightened instantly, like he had been waiting for this exact arrival. Through the thin curtains, her husband caught sight of shadows moving near the tree line, figures shifting in the dark, just out of full view. The cabin, once their sanctuary, was suddenly surrounded. Every exit was a gamble, every second another chance for the situation to spiral. The tension inside was unbearable. My sister wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her husband gave a subtle signal. Stay calm, stay quiet. He knew they were walking into a storm, and the next choice could decide everything. The cabin walls seemed to close in as the knock at the door grew louder. The knock at the door didn't stop. It grew harder, sharper, like someone trying to force their way into control. My sister froze, her back against the wall, while the fake officer at the doorway shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't leading anymore. He was waiting, almost deferring to whoever had just arrived outside. That's when it hit them. He wasn't acting alone. He was just the opening move. Her husband kept his posture calm, but his eyes tracked every detail. Through the crack in the curtain, he spotted the new vehicle. It wasn't marked, not official, but it carried more than one person. He could see silhouettes, two, maybe three, moving with purpose. Whoever they weren't neighbors stopping by to help. This was coordinated. The HOA hadn't just sent one man, they'd set up an entire operation around the cabin. Then came the sound that tightened his chest, a radio crackle, faint but unmistakable. The fake cop at the door touched something clipped to his vest, whispering into it as if waiting for orders. That was the moment her husband realized this wasn't intimidation anymore. This was an escalation, a test of how far the HOA was willing to go to drive them off the land. But the real twist wasn't outside, it was inside. My sister's phone, lying on the counter, buzzed with a new message. The text was from a neighbor she barely knew. Don't trust anyone tonight. They're not who they say they are. Her hands trembled as she showed it to her husband. The warning confirmed what he already suspected, but it also raised new questions. Who else in the community knew? And why would someone risk sending a message now? As the banging on the door grew louder and the shadows outside drew closer, it was clear this wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was a trap tightening from every direction, and they were running out of time. The pounding on the door rattled the whole cabin, and for a moment, it felt like the walls themselves might give way. My sister's breath came quick and shallow, but her husband stayed steady, his voice low and firm as he whispered, "Stay behind me." He had waited long enough, reading every detail, weighing every risk. Now, it was time to act. When the fake officer reached for the handle to push his way inside, the door swung open, not from his force, but from her husband's sudden move. In an instant, the fake cop stumbled forward, off balance, and was pinned against the frame. Shock flickered in his eyes, But it was too late. The quiet man who had stood so still was now in full control. Outside, the other figures rushed forward, their flashlights cutting through the dark. But her husband was already a step ahead. With calm precision, he used the element of surprise to disarm the imposter and drag him into the open. The cabin lights spilled onto the porch, and for the first time, the truth was undeniable. The so-called officer wasn't wearing real gear, just a costume pieced together to look convincing. The group outside froze, realizing their plan had unraveled. That's when headlights blazed from the opposite end of the road. A second vehicle approached, this one familiar, the neighbor who had sent the warning text. They weren't alone either. A county deputy stepped out alongside them, real badge shining in the beam. In the chaos that followed, the truth came spilling out. The HOA board had organized the intimidation, desperate to push my sister off the land for their development deal. But the final twist came with the deputy's words. Someone inside the HOA had already tipped off law enforcement, exposing the scheme from within. The fake cop's silence said it all as he was taken into custody. My sister's husband never raised his voice, never lost his calm, but in that quiet, decisive moment, he had turned their trap against them. And though the cabin stood safe, everyone knew this battle had revealed something bigger. The HOA's power wasn't as unshakable as it once seemed. When the flashing lights faded and the cabin finally fell quiet again, my sister and her husband sat together on the porch, the night air cool against their faces. The fear of what almost happened still lingered, but there was also a sense of relief. The threat had been exposed, the fake cop arrested, and the neighbors who had been too afraid to speak before now began to share what they knew. Piece by piece, the truth came out. The HOA's leaders had been pushing hard for a land grab, using intimidation and fear to break down resistance. With law enforcement now involved, the entire scheme began to crumble. The deputy assured my sister that charges were being filed and that the HOA's actions would be investigated. For the first time in months, she felt like someone was finally on their side. The neighbor who had sent the warning text explained that they couldn't stand by any longer once they realized just how far things had gone. That act of bravery became a turning point, proving that even in a community divided by fear, there were still people willing to do the right thing. Her husband, calm as ever, didn't celebrate. He simply reminded her that this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about standing firm and protecting what mattered. The cabin wasn't just property. It was family, history, and the freedom to live without being controlled by an HOA that had forgotten its purpose. As dawn broke over the trees, my sister realized something important. The HOA might have tried to use power and intimidation, but in the end, it was courage, truth, and resilience that won. And though the fight had been frightening, it also reminded everyone watching that no one should ever let fear drive them from what's rightfully theirs.